The air inside the market was heavy with heat and the stench of sweat. Voices rose and fell like waves, traders shouting over one another, customers laughing, arguing, bargaining. In the center of it all stood a row of iron cages, each one holding a living being. Some were silent, heads lowered. Others whispered in strange alien tongues. But one cage was different. It smelled of fear. Inside that cage sat a young alien girl. Her wrists were bound by cold metal cuffs that had cut into her skin. Her fur, once soft and bright, was matted and dull. A chain ran from her neck to the floor. The tail lay limp behind her, no energy left to flick in annoyance or pride. The traders had called her a pleasure animal when they brought her in. They didn't even use her real name. Maybe they didn't care to know it. Every time someone passed her cage, they looked at her like an object, not a person. She had learned to keep her eyes down. Looking at a buyer was dangerous. It made them think you were inviting them closer. So she kept her gaze fixed on the dirty straw under her feet. But she could still feel their stares, sharp as knives. The auction was already loud when the trader stepped forward, his voice booming. Fresh stock, exotic, rare breed, only for the finest buyers. He rattled the cage door, making the girl flinch. The crowd moved in closer, curious, eager. The trader grinned, knowing he had their attention. Perfect for pleasure, loyal if trained, obedient once broken. The girl's stomach turned. She had heard these words before. She knew what they meant. Bids began to fly from the crowd. Hands raised, credits offered, numbers shouted. She shrank back, pressing herself against the corner of the cage. It didn't matter who won, every buyer here wanted the same thing. Then she heard a voice she didn't recognize. Deep, steady, and not shouting like the others. Open the cage. The crowd went quiet. Heads turned toward the speaker. Standing a few steps away was a human man. His clothes were dusty from travel, and there was a long scar running down the side of his neck. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, were fixed on her. The trader laughed. You know the rules, human. You want her, you bid. The man shook his head. No, I'll pay your price. All of it now. A murmur ran through the crowd. No one refused the bidding process. It was a game to them, a show. But the human didn't seem interested in games. He stepped closer until he was right in front of her cage. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, she looked up. His eyes didn't have the hungry, cruel shine she was used to. They were steady, calm, and strange in a way she couldn't name. The trader's grin faltered. That's not how it works. The human reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal case. He opened it, revealing a neat stack of credit chips, enough to buy her twice over, enough to make the trader's greed drown out his pride. The trader's eyes lit up. Fine. Wait first. The scale was dragged forward. The door of the cage creaked open, and rough hands grabbed her arms, yanking her out. Her legs almost gave out. The sudden rush of open air felt dizzying. Was pushed onto the scale, the cold metal under her bare feet making her shiver. The trader called out her weight to the scribe. 105 units, he said with a chuckle, light but strong enough. The human didn't even glance at the scale. His eyes stayed on her. The trader jabbed her shoulder, forcing her to stand straighter for display. Done weighing? The human asked. The trader smirked and nodded. The human placed the credit case in his hands. It was heavy, real, and impossible to refuse. The trader's greed won. He waved toward the cage. She's yours, without hesitation. The human stepped forward and unfastened the chain from her neck himself. The cold metal fell away, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she could move without a tether. But instead of grabbing her arm like the traders always did, he extended his hand open, patient, as if waiting for her to choose whether or not to take it. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed that it was a trick, that this was just another kind of trap. But something about his stillness made her pause. The crowd began to jeer, their voices dripping with mockery. Go on, human, show us what you bought. She's just meat. Why wait? Break her in now. Her ears flattened against her skull, the words cutting like knives. She braced herself for the rough pull that always came next, but it didn't. The human simply waited slowly. Almost against her own will, she placed her bound hands in his. His grip was warm and steady, not crushing. The human gave her a small nod as if to say, "It's over." She didn't believe that yet, but for the first time in a long time, she wanted to. The market master was still grinning at the pile of credits in his hands when the human turned without a word. The alien girl stumbled after him, her legs weak, the crowd parting around them with curious eyes. Normally, a new purchase would be dragged, shoved, or thrown over a shoulder. But this man didn't touch her unless she was about to fall. The crowd didn't like it. In a place where cruelty was entertainment, kindness was a strange, unwelcome sight. Voices rose behind them, mocking, testing. "Hey, human, afraid she'd bite? You paid for her. Now own her." He didn't answer. His silence was louder than their shouts. They moved past stalls of weapons, cages, and steaming food carts. Every step away from the auction block made her heart beat faster, not slower. Freedom wasn't real in her world. Even if you escaped one cage, there was always another waiting. She kept glancing back, half expecting the trader to call them back, half expecting chains to snap around her neck again. When they reached the edge of the market square, the human stopped. He turned to face her fully. For the first time since he'd bought her, his voice broke the silence. "Do you know where you are?" She stared at him, unsure how to answer. Speaking had been dangerous in the market. It made you memorable, and that never ended well. She gave a small shake of her head. "You're in the Iron District," said, his tone calm, but his eyes scanning the shadows between buildings. "No one leaves here unless someone stronger than the district wants it." Her stomach tightened. She knew the rule. The market owned you until the market decided otherwise. He crouched slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "I am not here to own you. But if we walk out of here, someone will try to take you back. It's probably more than once." Her hands tightened into fists. Then why she stopped herself? The question felt too dangerous. He waited anyway. "Why? What?" She forced the words out. "Why pay for me? Could have bought food, weapons, a ship part. Not me." For a moment, something like a smile touched his face. But it was gone before she could read it, because everyone here saw an animal for sale. "I saw someone worth more than their asking price." Her throat ached, but she didn't know why. Before she could reply, a sharp whistle cut through the air. The human's head snapped toward the sound. 3 figures stepped from an alley, 2 armed with short blades, 1 carrying a shock net. Their eyes locked on her, not him. "Good find, human," one of them called with a smirk. "We'll take her off your hands." The human didn't step back. Instead, he moved half a step in front of her, his stance easy but ready. "You're welcome to try," he said, voice low and steady. One of the men laughed. "You think you can stop us? This is our district?" "That's the problem," the human replied, and then he moved. What happened next was too fast for her eyes to follow. A twist, a punch, the flash of steel, a body hitting the ground. One man fell with a broken jaw, the second with his arm bent at an impossible angle. The third dropped the net and ran, cursing. The human straightened, breathing steady. As if the fight hadn't cost him a drop of energy, he turned to her. "Come on, more will be coming." She stared at him for a long moment. Most buyers fought only to keep what they'd bought. But his words, his eyes felt like he was protecting her for a different reason. She still didn't trust him completely. But for the first time, she wanted to see where he was taking her. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows across the cracked streets as they left the Iron District. The alien girl's bare feet ached with every step, but the human didn't hurry her. He walked at a steady pace, glancing back now and then, as if expecting trouble to follow in her mind. The market was still with Hertha, the smell of rotting food, the sound of the auctioneer's voice, the metallic taste of fear. She had been bought and sold many times before, each time treated like cargo, like a thing to be used. But this time was different, and she didn't understand why. They stopped near a narrow bridge where the river below glimmered in the fading light. The human opened a small satchel and took out a flask of water. Without a word, he held it out to her. She stared at it, uncertain. The market offers were never gifts, they were trades, and trades always came with a cost. "Why lie?" she asked. "Softly, because you're thirsty," he said simply. as if that was reason enough. She hesitated, then took the flask, the cool metal brushing against her bound wrists. She drank slowly, almost afraid that too much would be taken back from her. But he didn't snatch it away. He let her finish, then poured a little more from his own supply. They walked again. And after a while she spoke without meaning to. "Did you know my weight before they put me on the scale?" He gave her a sideways glance. "I didn't care about the number. They measure value in weight. I don't." Her steps faltered. No one had ever said that to her before. By the time they reached the edge of the outer district, the streets were quieter. Small shops were closing, and the last of the daylight painted the walls gold. The humans stopped at a heavy wooden door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. Inside was a small room with a narrow bed, a table, and a single oil lamp. She stepped inside cautiously, expecting chains or locks. Instead, he closed the door and set his bag down. Then he pulled a short blade from his belt knot to threaten her, but to cut the metal cuffs from her wrists. The cold weight fell away, leaving angry red marks. She rubbed them without thinking, feeling the air on her skin for the first time. "In years, you're free to move," he said, placing the broken cuffs on the table. Her eyes narrowed. "Free in this city. Someone will just take me again." "Not while I'm here," he replied. His tone calm, but carrying something hard beneath it. She sank onto the bed, unsure if she should believe him. Every part of her wanted to rest, but rest had never been safe. She watched him as he lit the lamp and checked the locks on the door. He moved with the same steady patience he'd shown since the market, like someone who was used to being watched and judged. When he noticed her gaze, he asked, "What do they call you?" Her voice caught. It had been so long since anyone had asked her name. "Lyra," she whispered. He nodded once, as if storing it away like something valuable. "I'm Kale." For a moment the room was quiet, except for the distant hum of the city. She realized something strange. He hadn't once looked at her the way buyers always did. No hunger, no ownership. Only focus, like she was a problem he intended to solve. But outside. In the deepening night, footsteps paused near the window. A shadow moved across the wall. Lyra's chest tightened. She knew that sound. Someone was hunting again. Kale's hand was already on his blade before she could speak. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He stepped between her and the window, his eyes sharp in the lamplight. Whatever the black market had planned, he was ready to meet it head-on. The shadow outside shifted again, slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Lyra's pulse hammered in her ears. She had spent years in cages, but this feeling being hunted in the open was worse. Kale didn't move from his place between her and the window, kept his eyes on the faint outline of the intruder, while his hand reached silently for a second. Blade on his belt. The oil lamp's flame flickered, casting sharp angles across his face. The sound came again, a faint scrape of boot against stone. Then, without warning, the window latch began to turn. Kale moved fast. In one motion, he kicked the table toward the wall, blocking the window, and pulled Lyra to her feet. "We're leaving," he said, his tone flat but urgent. She hesitated. "Where?" "A place where they can't follow," he replied, already pulling open the door. The street outside was dim and narrow, the air cool with the scent of rain. Kale kept her close, one hand hovering near her back, but never pushing. He led her through a maze of side streets, avoiding the main road. Every so often he stopped, listening. Twice, Lyra heard footsteps behind them, quickening when they quickened. Slowing when they slowed, she wanted to ask who was following them. But fear held her tongue. They reached a crumbling stone wall at the edge of the district. Beyond it lay the ruins, a stretch of abandoned buildings where no trader or gang dared to go after dark. Lyra froze. "Dad, this place is cursed," she whispered. Kale glanced at her. "It's empty." "That's all we need." He found a gap in the wall and guided her through. The moment they crossed, the sounds of the city dulled. The air here felt still, heavy. Broken windows stared down like hollow eyes. They moved into an old building, its wooden floor groaning under their weight. Kale shut the door with a quiet push and finally let her sit on a half-broken chair. He scanned the shadows before speaking. You still think I bought you for the same reason as them? She avoided his eyes. No one buys without taking. Isaiah. Jaw tightened. I didn't buy you to own you. I bought you so they couldn't. Her chest ached at his words, but before she could respond, the sound returned footsteps. Heavier now. More than one pair. They had been followed, after all. Cale's expression didn't change, but his body shifted, ready for a fight. He handed her a small dagger. If they get past me, you run. Don't look back. She stared at the weapon, her hands trembling. She had never been given anything to defend herself with. The door creaked. A shadow crossed the threshold. Cale stepped forward. The air between him and the intruders thick with tension. For the first time since leaving the market, Lyra felt something strange, a spark deep inside her. Not fear, but the beginning of something dangerous. Hope. The first man through the door moved like he owned the darkness. His shoulders were broad, his face hidden beneath a half-mask, but the glint of a shock baton in his hand told Lyra, enough. This wasn't a thief. This was a retriever, one of the black market's enforcers, sent to reclaim valuable property. Two more followed, blocking the doorway completely. Their boots were silent on the floorboards, but the faint buzz of their weapons filled the air. Lyra's grip tightened. On the dagger Cale had given her, Cale didn't back away. His voice was low, almost calm. You've come for her. The masked man gave a slow nod. She isn't yours to keep, human. She belongs to the market. She belongs to herself, Cale said, and then he moved. The first strike came faster. Flash of steel from Cale's hand. The shock baton knocked aside before it could spark against his ribs. He twisted, grabbing the man's arm and sending him crashing into the wall. The second attacker lunged with a blade aimed at Cale's back. Lyra's voice tore from her throat before she could think. Behind you, Cale dropped low, the blade, whistling over his head, and swept the man's legs out from under him. The crash echoed through the empty building. The third enforcer hesitated, then made the mistake of glancing at Lyra. Cale was on him in a heartbeat, slamming him against the doorframe so hard the wood splintered. One by one, they hit the floor, groaning, cursing, clutching broken weapons. Cale didn't kill them. Instead, he stepped back, letting them drag themselves toward the exit. His voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut. Tell your master she is not for sale. When the last of them limped into the street, Cale shut the door and turned to Lyra. She was still gripping the dagger, her knuckles white. You didn't run, he said. She shook her head, still breathing hard. You said to run if they got past you. They didn't. For the first time, Cale allowed a small smile to break his usual steady mask. Good. The danger wasn't gone. She could feel it in her bones. The market didn't give up what it wanted. But something had shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but it wasn't the only thing anymore. For the first time, she thought maybe she could fight for herself too. The night stretched long after the fight. Cale hadn't spoken much, but he kept checking the shadows through the cracked window, his body never fully relaxing. Lyra sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the faint red marks around her wrists where the cuffs had been. The skin still burned, but the ache inside was worse. She had been freed before only. To be sold again. This time felt different, yet she didn't know why. Cale finally stepped away from the window and sat across from her. The lamplight threw soft gold across his face, making the scar on his neck stand out. They'll be back, he said. Those three, someone worse. Her chest tightened. Then why keep me? You could leave me, save yourself trouble. His gaze didn't waver. Because you are worth more than they can pay, worth more than they can imagine. She stared at him, trying to see if he was lying. No one in her life had ever said that without wanting something in return. You don't even know me, she whispered. I know enough, he replied, leaning forward slightly. I know you're still alive after they tried to break you. I know you didn't run tonight when you had the chance. No, you've been told you're nothing until you believe it. And I know they're wrong. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to look away, but his words held her still. Cale stood and opened his satchel, pulling out a small folded cloth. Inside was a silver pendant. Simple but finely made, the kind of thing no one in the Iron District could afford. He held it out to her. "It's yours," he said. She blinked at it. "Why?" "Because it belonged to someone who fought to be free and won. I think you will too." Her fingers closed around the pendant slowly, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy in metal, but in meaning. She didn't understand why it made her chest ache in a way that almost felt good. Before she could speak, a noise echoed from the street, a single whistle, sharp and cold. Cale's head snapped toward the sound. His jaw tightened. "They've marked us." Lyra's heart pounded. "Marked. They've decided we're worth hunting," he said, his tone calm but dangerous. He reached for his weapons, and "I don't plan on letting them win." In that moment, Lyra realized something. The market might see her as a prize, a thing to be owned. But to Cale, she was a fight worth having. The night air was colder on the outskirts of the city. Carrying the smell of wet stone and smoke, Cale led Lyra along a narrow trail that wound through the ruins, his pace steady but cautious. Behind them, the glow of the Iron District was fading, replaced by the dark stretch of hills. They didn't speak much. Every sound in the distance could be friend or foe, and both knew the market would not give up easily. But with each step, the ground felt less like a prison floor and more like something new, something that might be called freedom. At the edge of a broken archway, Cale stopped. From here, the land opened wide, a valley bathed in early dawn light. A small camp lay in the distance, smoke curling from its fires. "That's where we're going," he said quietly. "They don't take orders from the market. You'll be safe there." Lyra stared at the view. She had dreamed of places like this when she was younger, before chains became part of her body. But seeing it now felt unreal. "Safe," she repeated softly, as if testing the word on her tongue. Cale looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to stay with me after this," he said. "You choose what happens next." Her throat tightened. She thought of every buyer, every trader, every hand that had ever dragged her somewhere without asking. No one had ever given her the power to choose. She looked down at the silver pendant in her hand, its cool weight pressing into her palm. It reminded her of his words, "You are worth more than they can imagine." Slowly, she shook her head. "I'll go where you go." Something softened in his eyes, but he didn't argue. "Then we go together." They began walking toward the valley, the rising sun painting the world gold. Behind them, the black market would remember her as merchandise lost. But here now, with each step away from chains, Lyra knew they had been wrong about her all along. She was not an animal to be bought. By weight, she was someone worth fighting for. And now, someone worth keeping free.